So Heather Craig is the owner of Thriving Ways Financial, and I brought her on today because I'm really excited. We've had the opportunity to do work together on clients. So in the CFO role, I've been on the CFO role, and she's been handling the kind of the managed accounting services, everything from bookkeeping to system advising and really just kind of helping make the accounting function nice and smooth, and processes and procedures and things like that. So, which I think is much bigger than just bookkeeping. So I like to say managed accounting services, because I feel like it encompasses more than just recording transactions over and over again. So I wanted everybody just to meet Heather if you don't already know her, and then so Heather, welcome.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me on, Hannah. I appreciate it so much.
Yeah, well, you have had a really interesting career, and you've kind of moved from corporate into now having your own business and doing your own thing. So, so I wanted to just kind of bring you on and kind of hear like what your perspective was, because you actually worked directly in an accounting, or not an accounting firm. You went into corporate accounting, which, working for a large corporation and being in their internal in-house accounting team. And that's kind of what the topic of today is for small businesses, when is that time to move from outsourcing your bookkeeping or outsourcing your accounting and then bringing it in-house? So I guess just get us started and tell us like about where you've come from and sort of what you're seeing as now that you're doing this on the other side.
Okay. Yeah, so I worked for a large corporation and we had accounting staff, and I was actually with them from the very, very beginning. So we didn't really have accounting staff, and then we grew into accounting staff. It was more of an outsourced type thing at first too, so I do have that background kind of bringing it all in-house. And that was a company where I was able to grow into my position and further my education while I was there. Excuse me. So we ended up with, excuse me, I'm so sorry. We had a CFO, ended up with a CFO, and then I was in the controller role. And then we had, what was there, like two accounting staff under that, but we were also a commodity company. So we had like a grains group that had more of a grains accounting type services. Well, so my role ended up kind of being a lot of go-between all the different departments and managing the functions. So accounts receivable, we had an accounts receivable person and accounts payable person, and then we had like the grains department, as well as all of the investors that we had to report to. We were an SEC reporting company. Wow. So I oversaw the financial process, the closing process on a daily basis, but then at a monthly level, and then on a quarterly level with the SEC reporting, making sure that all of our reports were good and the dialogue in the SEC reports made sense for how the business was operating. So yeah, that's kind of how I started. And then I left corporate and started my own company. And so now I'm more of an outsourced controller, managed accounting type person. And that's a totally different perspective when you're dealing with multiple clients versus very, very focused on the business that you're in. Mm-hmm. So there's advantages and disadvantages, and I think that's what we're going to talk about, right?
Yeah, definitely. So, and actually that's really a very good point that I didn't even think about. So I wrote a blog post last week, or posted it last week, on kind of a few of the signs of when it might be a good time to bring someone in-house. We've got a couple clients who are sort of in this space right now, where they're trying to decide, does it make sense to keep on with an outsourced bookkeeper, or maybe it makes sense to bring someone inside. And that's an interesting perspective that you just had with, now that you're outsourced, now you're trying to manage multiple clients.
Yeah.
And I think that the focused attention is one of the really big differentiators between having in-house staff versus having an outsourced staff. So when you're an employee and you're sitting in the desk every day and you're in operations, mm-hmm. that's your whole world.
You're fully integrated at that point, and you can give questions can be answered faster generally.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, you could like walk over to somebody's desk and be like, hey, what happened here? Or
exactly.
give me that receipt.
Yes.
Or even the CEO or whoever can come over and ask you a question really quickly, and you can sit down and look at reports. You can do meetings really quickly, and there's a lot of benefit to being able to have that. And some people work really well with some people really work really well with like being able to multitask and have multiple clients on their minds all the time.
Right.
So that might work really well for like somebody who's providing like outsourced services. But then there's other people who really do really well when they can just do one task at a time, or think about one thing. And maybe one day is like, I do accounts payable today. I write all the checks to whoever, or I'm processing through the bills on one day. And that might be a better fit for the actual client than, having it all kind of out in cloud land, doing things virtually. So, yeah. So one of the things that we have talked about, and we kind of talked about before we hopped on live, was that people want to know from us, because we are advisors, people want to know, is there a dollar amount that you reach where all of a sudden like, oh, now I have a certain amount of revenue, now I need an in-house person?
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think there's a lot of questions in the financial world overall, like when should I hire a bookkeeper?
Right.
Outsourced, when should, all of these things, when should I hire someone to do my marketing? There's a lot of things that people are like, there's this magic number we should hit, but I don't think there is. I think everyone is individual, everyone is customized, and like you need to do what you need to do for your business, and don't worry about like what someone else is doing or hitting some certain level. It's really what your needs are, right?
Yeah.
So you start getting into complicated issues when you have inventory and you need lots of shipping and inventory tracking.
Yeah.
That can create a lot of complication, and you may not have huge revenue numbers, but like if you don't keep a good handle on that on a regular basis, then like your business is going to get away from you anyways. So maybe it makes sense at that point, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, you could potentially just be making, you could be just a couple $100,000 into your business and then realize like there's no way for me to grow and scale without getting a really good handle on the financial side. I think inventory is such a good point, because with inventory, especially if you had like a brick and mortar shop, or you have even an e-commerce store or something like that, you constantly got this ins and outs. Like you could be receiving every single day. You could be, hopefully you're selling every day.
We hope so, right?
But you are selling a lot. And so you've got this like constant ebb and flow. And operationally, to what your point was of like, when you're there, you're seeing a box come in the door, and then you're seeing what it looks like in the financials. That is a really valuable, just a valuable place to be, that you're seeing the operations, and then you're seeing it flow through to the financials at the same time.
Immediate. Yep.
Mm-hmm. And then there's not as much confusion as like, well, I have this invoice, but when did this come in? And I don't really know. And was this box, did you really receive everything in this box? I mean, if you're in an outsourced situation like that, it can get really tricky. And then you're having to write emails to the owner of the business or whoever's in charge of shipping or blah, blah, blah. And it can just create a lot of that back and forth that we're trying to minimize in our lives as much as possible.
Right. And if you bring someone in-house to do those tasks and to do those things, the communication is immediate and like, right away. So
yeah. And sometimes it can be cheaper too.
sometimes, right? Yep.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of depends on, volume and how much you need someone. But when you're typically talking about like per hour,
yeah, for sure,
going to be paying an outsourced person more per hour than you might be to bring someone in-house. It all depends on skill level. It all depends on a lot of things. I'm not going to promise that it'll be cheaper.
Yeah.
But again, it's part of that assessment of like, is this the best move for you? Let's look at it from a high level. What do you really need? And what skill level do you really need?
Right. And that's our role too as the advisor, right? Is to like guide the client in making that decision. Yeah, it kind of hurts us because we lose that business or we lose part of that revenue ourselves. But ultimately, that's what we're here for, is to be a better resource for the client anyways, and to help make those moves when it's time to bring it in-house.
Yeah, I would much rather see my clients, I would much rather lose a client because they are scaling up and they need a different level of service than for anything else. Like, I want what's best for them at the end of the day. And if that means that they need to bring someone in, then we can help them assess, okay, if we know what functions have been happening and we also are seeing where the gaps are, like maybe the outsourced person is doing, a core process, but we really could see, expense reporting getting better, or, process approvals, or like maybe there needs to be some just general documentation improvements. We can see those things and say, okay, with an in-house person, now we know the type of person we even need to bring into this role, because we know everything that they should be able to do. I mean, and this week I've actually been even interviewing for a kind of staff accountant role for one of my clients. And it's an interesting process.
I think it would be interesting, like from the outside, when you're not like in the client location doing that hiring. That would be, I haven't done that with any of my clients, so
well, you get a little protective with your clients, right? Like, you want what's best for them, and so you're going to be a little bit more picky. You
can get a little critical, right? You're like, well, can you do this and this and this? But when you bring someone in-house, also, like, you can put them in different roles. They, maybe it's more of a part-time accounting type work, but what can they do in HR? What could they do for policy writing or procedure implementation, or helping with assistant type tasks? And you get that cross training too sometimes. So that can be helpful to the business.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even like, this happens in like some of my clients, like, okay, the admin assistant who normally answers the phone is gone for the day. She's sick. Oh no, who's going to answer the phone? One of my clients, we joke about it because they're an engineering firm and none of them like to be on the phone. The engineers do not like to be on the phone. It's like they would rather die. So one time I was there and the phone was ringing and they were all looking at it like,
who's going to answer it?
Because the assistant who normally answers the phone was gone, and they just didn't want to be like the first person to answer the phone. And I was like, okay, first of all, y'all need to grow up. But second, there's like another person who might be able to answer the phone for them.
Yeah, well, that I felt like that was always a thing with in my corporate role as well. Like, we would get frustrated when the guys that were doing the, taking all the calls for the grain, for the corn, wouldn't answer the phone, because that's who the farmer wants to talk to. They don't want to talk to an accountant that has no clue what the price is doing right now.
Right.
But I always found it important to take care of the customer. Yeah. So it didn't bother me so much, but I wasn't shy like others.
Yeah. I mean, another, like, cross training. What other things are really good for someone who's in an accounting role to take on? I mean, definitely you might still want to have like an HR professional on your team, but kind of just some of the day-to-day stuff, keeping documentation in a certain place and helping with filing, and making sure that your back office is nice and clean, because back office meaning like your receipts are filed and your just filing structure makes sense. Like, there's they're typically people who are, I'm not going to say everyone because I'm not necessarily this person, but typically people who are in like a bookkeeping role and accountants, they tend to be organized.
Yeah.
And as much as I like to say that I am organized, I am not on the far spectrum of organized. But those types of people might be really well suited for helping with some other tasks, even in the office, that might even be outside of an accounting role. So, you know, if you're already feeling like you might need another staff anyway, maybe consider, you know, whether or not a bookkeeper or somebody like a staff accountant might make sense to bring onto your team.
Right. What else they could do for you.
Yeah.
It's funny. I mean, I think that like when accountants get into a corporate role, for sure, they definitely end up wearing a bazillion hats.
Yes.
For sure. So,
you know, it's interesting. Even as I've been interviewing people for this upcoming role, I've had many people say to me, I would really like to be in a role where I have lots of things to do, because then it doesn't get boring. And so in some ways, like wearing a lot of hats is hard. Where it can be difficult for people where like and that's where you need to assess your staff and the type of person you need to bring on. There are going to be the people that are really satisfied doing the same thing every day.
Yeah,
like
it's true.
They're going to feel like, you know what, this works for me. I know exactly what to do. I sit down, I do my work, and I'm good. And then there's going to be the other people who are not going to be happy with that at all, where they want to have like a variety of work and they want to be able to take over and have ownership into something as well.
Yeah. And when you really start growing and you need like maybe multiple accounting people in your business, like you do not want them to all be the same person, because they'll butt heads and that causes issue. And I found that like on my team, I had one that was just like so happy to just come in and do her job. And then I had one that was like really growth oriented and like wanted to learn my role and wanted to learn more and be able to take on more roles. And that was actually like a really good cohesive team to have like that. Because if they had both been like, oh, I want to be able to do what Heather does, I want to be able, like, that was too much.
Yeah.
Like we had that person that was steady and just did her job and like was happy to just do that too. So
yeah, that's a really good point, because as you scale up and you are getting into a place where maybe, you know, one person in-house is not enough, maybe you need someone to like focus on payroll, maybe you need someone to focus on just AR and managing invoicing, and like maybe it's invoicing and timesheets if you're something like an engineering firm or a law firm or something like that. You know, that type of role needs to work well. Because there's just so much crossover. So one thing that can happen, and we kind of mentioned this before, is one thing that can happen when you bring someone in-house, especially if you're not really wanting to directly oversee. So some CEOs bring people in, but they're like, I want the help, but I don't really want to manage that person. Bookkeepers have been known to commit fraud. Also, outsourced bookkeepers have too, but in-house, you have more access.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have maybe access to check stock. You know exactly like how to get a signature if the CEO is not paying attention. You know some of the settings on the back end, and you might be able, like a bookkeeper who did not have scruples, if you will, would be in a situation that they could potentially take advantage. So maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I was thinking that when we were just talking about having like multiple staff people and you know, like there's an importance for internal controls, especially when you grow and get really large. In my role, we were under a lot of scrutiny for internal controls just because of SEC reporting and the amount of investors that we had. So we had to like have internal audits on a regular basis. And it was super important to have the person approving the checks and signing the checks be someone different than who was entering the invoices, and things like that. So those are definitely things when you bring someone in-house that you need to consider, that you have good internal controls and that you are willing to manage that. For sure.
Well, and that might be one of those things that people don't think about. They're like, well, I did a background check and this person has never committed a fraud before, or I just really feel like I trust them. Or even like they could be a recommendation from somebody. So-and-so worked with this person for a long time. And, that's great. I fully encourage people to like get a vetted, trusted person and to do background checks and to do these things. But you almost don't want to set someone up to even be tempted to potentially do something. If you give them, it's like if you laid out like 100 diamonds on the table and left them there for long enough, anybody might be like, oh, you're not gonna miss this one diamond. Yeah, like it's like someone who never would have been tempted to actually like break into a jewelry store and steal diamonds in their entire life, but if they were given the opportunity and nobody was watching them, nobody's counting the diamonds, like nobody's ever like auditing whether or not that is a thing.
But you should be.
What was that?
Someone should be tracking that inventory, though.
Exactly. Yes, that would be a specific identifier type of inventory. But besides the point, yes, if you are in a situation that you give someone enough freedom and they know that nobody is checking, it could go down just because something happens. Or what happens sometimes is people borrow money from the company. And you might be like, well, I just need $100 right now. I will pay it back next week. It's not a big deal. Nobody's looking at it. And they just start creating that thing in their head. So a couple things you can do, internal control sounds kind of scary.
Yeah, it does.
Like that sounds like, oh no, I'm never going to be able to do that. I won't hire somebody inside because I don't know how to do that. But
give some examples.
Yeah, so internal controls could be something like a financial review, simple financial review. Having someone look over the bank statements. Like bank statements, that's one of the biggest things that had business owners just opened up their bank statements and looked to see where the checks were being written to. That would have actually caught a lot of frauds. Like there was some like report I was reading about that. Just an overall financial review and looking through it and actually understanding what's in the financials and looking into the detail is like a really, really basic one.
Does it make sense?
Yeah. Does it make sense to the operations of the business? Does our cash actually line up to like what's in the bank and the outstanding checks? Are bank reconciliations being done? Pretty basic.
Thing too, like bank reconciliations generally are fairly easy to learn. So like have the person that's writing the checks and then have someone different do the reconciliation. That would be like really easy.
So there's this concept, and we'll get like way far too much into like auditing stuff, but there's a concept of segregation of duties.
Right.
And it is exactly what it is. It's separating, giving two different people a key duty. And like you just gave a really great example to that: check writing and bank reconciliation. So you don't give one person like total access. Like they're the ones who are setting up the vendor. They're the ones who are paying the vendor. They're the ones who are writing the checks. They're the ones who are taking any checks to the bank and can do whatever. And that's one of the challenges of the small business. Is when you give someone so much power to do so much stuff internally. So that's kind of where somebody like we can help with that type of thing. I mean, we can absolutely help with either being that CFO level, we can be that, overall financial review. We can help people, set up those internal controls so that they know that their processes going forward are going to be checked and balanced, if you will. But yeah, I mean, I think ultimately we're just trying to think of what do you need to do to be successful in the endeavor if you do it.
Right. Absolutely.
I think those are, the internal control piece is really important in that. And that's probably a whole nother live we could have.
It is just like fraud and risk and everything. Yeah.
Yeah. So actually next week, we've got a blog post out coming about fraud, and I think we're going to do another Facebook Live with a couple other people who've either experienced fraud themselves or seen it, or help us know like what to look out for. So yeah, so I think we'll probably wrap up because we're coming up on the hour. But anything else you want to add on in-house?
I don't think so. I think it's just important to really grab someone that can help you look at that strategically and make sure that it's the right decision for you. And no answer is perfect for everyone. So just make sure that you're looking at your personal situation and what would work best for you. So.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% ditto. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks, Heather. Thanks for taking the time this morning.